It was to be a Saturday and Sunday off my friend Jake, and I escaping the city for a stroll and a pint of beer in front of the fire. The rental property posting had been for a tiny cabin deep within blackwood pines deep in trees, towering tall, and nothing else. Ideal. We pulled up just as sun set the trees, swallowing the final rays of light as we jounced up the gravel road. The cabin looked worse than in the photos, rotting wooden beams, sagging porch, grimy windows glaring at us with disdain. Cozy Jake joked, elbowing me as we hauled our suitcases in, the air thick with the odor of mold, and something else, a metallic smell, the smell of dry blood. The door slapped shut behind us with a wicked solidity. We lit lanterns, cracked open a few beers, and tried to get the shadows out of our heads in the way the shadows seemed to stretch impossibly far in dancing light. And that was when we heard it, the first whisper. A voice too low to be wind by a fraction growled behind the room. "You shouldn't have come." Jake froze in mid-gesture beer, midway to lips. "Did you hear that?" I laughed, roughly attempting to cover. "Hear what?" But I had. And worse, I could feel it. The words crawled against my ear, damp and nipping like a tongue, tracing the contours of it. We attempted to ignore it. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe the leaves blowing down the roof. But then the whispers returned. "He knows you're here." This time down the hallway. A voice quivering with age or grief. Jake went pale. "We have to go outside." I longed to oblige. My entire body yearned to escape. But the door would not open. It wasn't locked. The handle turned easily, but the wood wouldn't move, as if something huge pushed against it on the other side. That's when the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the window behind me. I turned. There was nothing there, just blackness pressing against the glass. Then tap, tap, tap against the other window. Jake grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. We're not alone. The cold seeped in. We panted, our spumescent gas fogs misting ahead of us, as the susurrations massed into a clamor, coalescing, begging, shrieking all around us. "Get out, get out, get out." Flashes blazed. In the fading light, I saw them in shadow in corners of rooms, pinched faces distorting into loathsome grins, empty eyes. The floor creaked. Something heavy moved across the ceiling, nails scraping wood. And the porch lights dimmed. In darkness, externalities reached out to me. Frozen fingers wrapped around my wrist, dragging me toward them. I screamed, struggling, but it was hopeless, too powerful. Jake shouted at the window next to me, but his voice was far away, overwhelmed by sound or the darkness beyond engulfing it. I was dragged along the corridor, knees in front of me banging against boards, fingernails splitting as I scraped against wood. The whispers screamed, now chanted on the other side of my window, laughed. "He's here, he's here, he's." The far door at the end of the hall creaked open. The room inside was black as coal, but I could feel something waiting, something that had waited a long, long time. The last thing I remember is the stench, rot, and damp soil before the door closed behind me. I woke up outside, stretched out in the earth at the forest edge. Dawn was filtering through the sky, a yellowish gray. Jake was nowhere around. The cabin door stood open wide, dark, and motionless inside. The police never caught up with him. They tried to explain it away as an animal attack, blamed it on a bear or cougar. But I know what I heard, what I felt. Late at night, occasionally, I still hear the whispers, and I know he's still waiting. The name itself ought to have given me warning, a spot where trees had become too big for themselves, their crooked branches gripped around each other like fingers of bone. A spot where the wind no longer whistled but whispered. And I was a fool, foolish and blind. And when my friends dared me to sleep over in that old cabin among those woods, I laughed and accepted. Worst choice I ever made. Lacey, Ryan, and I left around the time the shadows fell the sky, already bruise-colored. The road narrowed, then disappeared altogether, and we walked the final mile through scrub that scratched against our pants. The final light was dying when we arrived at the cabin, and the air was thick as if the forest itself were breathing in. The place was worse than I'd imagined. Rotting wood windows like black empty eyes. The door hung crooked on its hinges, groaning as Mark shoved it open. Home sweet home. Ryan joked, but his voice was too tight. We went inside, throwing flashlights over mold-specked walls and leaf-covered floors. There was a fireplace, shadowy interior, and a snapped rocking chair gently swaying in the corner. The moment I looked, my skin crawled because that chair wasn't covered in dust like all the others. It seemed used. Lacey had noticed it too. "Someone's been here," she whispered. Mark snarled. "Maybe just troublemaker kids." But I knew better. The air did not feel right. Too still, too heavy, as if something was pushing against us, looking at us through the blackness. We were able to get a fire started, cracked open some beers, attempted a joke about it. But then the sounds began. It started with just the wind, except there was no wind. The trees outside were motionless. Then there was the tapping. Light at first, like the tip of fingers on glass. Ryan stopped mid-sentence. "You hear that?" We all did. The tapping grew louder, harder, not on the windows anymore, on the walls. Something was moving outside, creeping around the cabin. Lacey's breath hitched. "There's no one out there. We're miles from." A thud at the door. We screamed. Mark grabbed a poker next to the fireplace, his hands shaking. "Who is there?" he screamed. "Nothing." Then at the door, a voice. "Let me in." Not human. Too wet. Too hungry. Ryan backed away from the fire again. What the devil was that? The door shook more vigorously this time. The wood groaned. "Let me in." Lacey sobbed. I gripped her arm, my heart pounding in my throat. "We have to leave. Now." Mark shook his head. "No way. Outside." But we couldn't stay, because then the really loud sounds began. Scratching. From within the walls. Something had been with us inside. The flame danced, shadows writhing on the ceiling. The rocker started to rock. Back. Forward. Back. Forward. Empty. But not empty. Lacey screamed. That's when the lights flickered out. We were shrouded in darkness. The flames were extinguished as if they'd been snuffed out. Our ragged gasps and the creak of that accursed chair were the only noises. And then a whisper in my ear. "You shouldn't have come." I ran. Didn't hesitate. Just ran. The rest of them were right behind me, crashing into the darkness through the door. Cold hit me in the face, but I didn't let up. Leaves slapped across my face as I ran, my friends' footsteps thudding behind me. But then one by one their screams stopped. First Ryan. Spasm of water, gagged air, choking. Then Mark's snap of shattered bone. Lacey did more than they did. Almost made it. Before something pulled her back off. I never glanced back. Never stopped. I just kept running until my lungs were burning, until trees were growing more and more far apart, and I staggered out onto the highway. The police came a few hours later, talking nonsense, scraped from head to toe. They combed the woods. They found the cabin, and it was vacant. No trace of Mark, Lacey, or Ryan. But you know what? They did find something. Footprints. And they were coming out of the cabin, and beaten deep into the ground, beaten into floorboards, a single word and some old and black stuff. Run. I did. But gets up at midnight. Sometimes even I still feel the knocking. And I know it's no longer out there. I would never have been a Black Hollow. Even its name was one that would have frightened us away from their Black Hollow. One of the types of places you got lost in the regions of where they mumbled about woods under their breath and ground sipped blood. We were idiots, teens, and uninformed. We hungered for experience. We learned horror. We were only a block off one way on a Saturday, 5 of us in Jake's old clunker, Jeep, yelling, singing along to the radio, slug, a juggling around a jug of rot gut whiskey. GPS had been out for miles, but we drove on over the rough dirt road into the woods on Jake's unshakable sense of direction. By the time we got to the cabin, the sun had dropped below the level of the trees, and the sky was filled with horrid reds and purples. The cabin stood deserted, rotting, with shattered windows, creaky porch that creaked underfoot. But the door was ajar. "Somebody's been here," Lisa whispered, tracing her finger along the smudged kitchen table. On it in the middle, one plate, some dark and crusty on its surface. Hunters probably, shrugged Jake. But the sound was too booming, too straining. We lit the candles, opened other drinks, tried laughter, creeping tension up our backs away. And we found the basement. It was a little door jammed, and underneath, a stained, frayed-out rug. We opened it straight away, and the scent wafted at us, copper mildew, something chemical bitter, tasting like formaldehyde that stuck around too long. The steps creaked beneath our steps as we descended, flashlights burning through dark, heavy silences. And we saw the dolls. Dozens, if not scores, stood at stiff attention on the shelves, glass-hard eyes fixed on us, mirroring our horror-stricken faces. They were not your typical dolls, though. Their bodies contorted, mouths stitched into open screams for eternity. Some of them had no eyes. Others had 2 or more sets of 2s. And in the center of the room, a small wooden chair splattered a deep red crimson. "Something is wrong," Mark backed away. Then the door slammed shut behind us. We shouted, ran up the stairs, pounded on the door. No answer. No noise except our frightened gasping. And then laughing. A wild, wrong, childish laughter from the dark. The flashlight exploded. There was some movement at the other end of the room. We had no hesitation in finding out. We burst the door open and sprinted inside, sprinted through the cabin into darkness. Trees closed behind us, branches cracking across us. And behind, chaos. Footsteps, but they were walking, not running. As if whatever chased us had overtaken itself and declared that it did not have to run. We crawled in stealthily into the Jeep. The engine's roar awakened wheels spinning mud as we fishtailed onto the highway. We were silent. We did not dare glance back. But when we hit the highway, Lisa was crying. Because on her lap lay one of the dolls. Its head squirmed up to regard her, and its embroidered mouth smiled. The police had come to the cabin, and it was empty. A chair was nowhere to be found, nor the dolls. Just dust. Quiet. But late at night, sometimes I will hear someone laugh outside my window, and I know they're still looking for us.